set? Let's get rolling on the Clinton Thayer. This is the first time I've ever given this presentation, and I've been working like a madman the last 2 days to make sure I know what I'm talking about. So bear with me here. All right. This is John Elliott Thayer from Lancaster. And he was without a doubt, the brains and the money behind the famous Clinton Thayer. He was the president of the Worcester East Agricultural Society, which was a Worcester County, more farming type of event, much like a Grange or kind of like the Springfield Exposition, Eastern States kind of thing. That's what the event started off as. He was quite a guy. Of course, Harvard educated. His family is the one that brought the railroad to Lancaster, and that's why the station was called Thayer Station. You probably heard of the Bird Museum on Main Street, now on AUC property. That was his, all right, the Bird Museum. He was a collector of birds, and that was in later life. In earlier, when he was a younger man, he was into raising thoroughbred horses and race horses. And he ended up marrying a Forbes from Clinton, and that would be Franklin Forbes, so Franklin Street, Forbes School. And so he had money and he married into money, and tremendously influential. In some ways, like the Bigelows were to Clinton, Thayers certainly were to Lancaster. And this, of course, is where he lives. The house is still standing today. It's Maplehurst Farm up on George Hill Road in Lancaster behind AUC. That's where he raised his horses. Some of them were nationally known horses. And he was quite the shrewd businessman is what he was. I guess, I'll never know, but I guess back in those days, all the rich and influential people who were in the horsemanship field, they all raced their horses in Newport, Rhode Island. That was the place to go. That's where if you bought a new horse, you brought it to Newport, Rhode Island, and you raced it there, and everybody else could see what you bought and how it went and how fast it was and all of this. So this guy was because he ran the Agricultural Society in Worcester County pretty much, and they already had a trotting park, the driving park they called it, up on top of Greeley Hill. He decided that he bought a horse for $50,000. So in 1889, 1890, that was a lot of money. And he decided to do something really different. He said, I'm not bringing that horse that everybody wants to see. I'm not bringing that to Newport, Rhode Island. I'm going to race it on the top of Greeley Hill in Clinton. And needless to say, every millionaire and every kind of influential types from down and throughout New England ended up coming to the Clinton Thayer instead of going to Newport. And that's how he kind of promoted this whole the Clinton Thayer. So here it is today, and somebody asked me thinking I would know, and I should have, but I don't. Remember, the Clinton Thayer started in 1889, all right? And yes, it was on the property that is now St. John's Cemetery. But first of all, there was no cemetery there until 1899. That's when they moved the 4,000 bodies from Cemetery Island behind Clinton High School and moved them up to Greeley Hill. So for the first 10 years of this fair, this was just all nothing but a big, huge open field, kind of a plateau right above town, beautiful scenery, fresh air, and so that's how it started. Once the Catholic bodies started to be buried, I believe, I know they came up the back road through like what they used to call Bates's Pit. Now there's a neighborhood there, and come in the back way. And I think what they did was they filled in the cemetery from the back going forward. So even by the time this ended in 1915, It's not like people were partying on the left and buried bodies on the right. It really almost, you know, it was almost two different areas, but that's how big it was. But I do believe they use this big open field that's to the left of the cemetery itself. And I was just up there the other day taking these pictures, and I didn't realize that they were just putting in a road. So they had been burying bodies on the left side for, somebody said 10 years, maybe 20 years, whatever. But up until that time, this was wide open all the way. Those are fairly new graves there. They really are. So I have a bunch of different pictures. Some of them are on display out there, and you'll see them. But here's the ticket office, and you can see just, of course, the way it was, that people, of course, dressed up. You know, today we go to church in our pajamas and things like that, you know, and you go to Walmart in your bathing suit and all that kind of stuff. But there, if it was the fair, it was usually 3 days long, usually a Thursday, Friday, and a Saturday, and you dressed up. You know, that was what you did. And you bought your tickets there, probably 25 cents or 50 cents to get in there. There was this big exhibition hall. And again, that's because it started pretty much as like a fruit, vegetable, cattle, pumpkins, like a true Grange type of show. Nothing really else other than that to begin with. And so I want to read a quick little passage from that. This was like the invitation that was in the Current back then. Said, you may be and you should be a contributor. If you have a choice horse or cow, or a favorite hog, sheep, goat, dog, rabbit, goose, hen, or parrot, don't be afraid to send it to the exhibition. If you have raised a plate of splendid apples, pears, peaches, or plums, or if your garden has produced a mammoth pumpkin, squash, carrot, turnip, or potato, do not be bashful, but pass the treasures along for others to see and enjoy. Do not allow any of your neighbors to beat you on the lines of cattle, fruit, or vegetables. So they were inviting everybody, and not just from Clinton, of course. This is central Massachusetts. And, you know, come on and take part. Kind of in some ways like Mayberry. I guess I've been watching too much Andy Griffith lately, but it's kind of like those types of things. You win a little blue ribbon if your pickles are the best, or something like that. And here's some pictures of the inside of that exhibition hall. You can see these are apples, but look at the big sign. It says West Boylston. So as a town, they said, here's West Boylston apples. And we have plenty of pictures. And they're the same thing, only the sign says Sterling, sign says Clinton, sign says, you know, whatever. That's what they did. Even flowers. If you had the best flowers in your garden, you could put them on display, and who knows, maybe win a blue ribbon. That was the idea of it. And this is from an old postcard, and they called it then a cattle show. And a cattle show it certainly was. This is an advertising piece. You can see the size of these things. And they even brought in, I believe, yes, this is the largest oxen in the world. 8,600 pounds. Owned by somebody in Maine. But they brought them all the way down to Clinton to show off their stock. Now, here's some other things. Of course, they had a grandstand there, huge, held 1,000 people. Look at the size of this, and look at the crowd. And in the middle was the, what they call the oval. Come on. Okay, forget it. Anyway, inside here was the oval. So here's the track. It was a quarter-mile track. 4 times around is a mile. And then the inside was where they might have had special events, special daredevil events, or things like that I'll talk about in a minute. Here, of course, is the famous Faker's Row. Fakers, of course, were kind of like carny people, all right? It was more games of chance, places that you'd probably get cheated out of your money if you weren't careful. And I have a little article from the Item that talked about that particular area. You'll get a kick out of it. If it's a three-legged horse you want to see, he's there. You can see the beauty of the future as foretold by a palmist, if that suits your fancy. The freaks of the land and sea are to be seen. And if you like cider, it's there, or moxie, if you prefer. By the way, we have some moxie right out here. Thank you, Bob Martini. You can ring a can, which I imagine means the carnival type of events. You can ring a can, or a watch, or even a diamond ring. If you are hungry, there's a menu to tempt your appetite. You can listen to the hawkers tell their lies, and it won't cost you anything unless they persuade you that they're telling the truth. So this was a great game of chance. Look at this. You see this? Look at this. This is Hickory Bill, the champion dodger of the world. Now, when I was a kid at the carnival, you could take some kind of baseball or softball and throw it at a target. But this kid from Brockton, that's his head right there. He was the champion dodger. He had his head out there, and you threw stuff at him. And he was so good at it, apparently, that he lived to tell about it, I guess. And then this other things were weightlifting, little children. Weightlifting, that was another demonstration in Baker's Row. And the Item carried this little quick thing. Hickory Bill has his head with him, and it's just as hard to hit as it was last year. So here's more general scenes, huge crowds. And the crowds brought a certain type of crime. Anybody want to guess what kind of crime?
Pickpocket.
Very good, pickpockets, definitely. And so there were cops, there were special police, there were the Clinton police, and there were even undercover police, because it was so common to get your pocket picked because of these huge crowds. Crowds, remember, it's a 3-day event, but it was always consistently 25 to 35,000 people there in Clinton, coming to Clinton during those days. 25 to 35,000. They had tents set up. For instance, Clinton Hospital had a lunch tent, and the profits made went to Clinton Hospital. Here's more general scenes.
There's the moxie.
Yeah, there you go. Shouldn't have said that. They're supposed to be subliminal messages. You're going to go get some moxie after this round. One thing they always did, it's hard for us to imagine, but I mean, this was a big deal in Clinton. It was a big, big deal. And the first day of the event was always Children's Day. And it was so big that they canceled school for the day. All right? Clinton canceled school and Lancaster canceled school, so that all the kids could come on that first day, and I guess it was half price or whatever, but the kids would come there. The kids weren't supposed to come on the second and third days. And when they did, I know the Item carried an interesting article about the truant officer who happened to go up there in the middle of the day on a Thursday or Friday. And they saw, the reporter talked about the kids hiding under tents and hiding in barrels and all this stuff to get away from the truant officer. Like we did with Marty Gibbons, I guess. But, here is just some advertising. And we have some on display out there. This was a great thing. This gentleman with his little Clinton Fair pouch. It was in every Worcester County newspaper. These are postcards. That usually there's a picture of the previous year's event, and then they are promoting this year's event. That looks like it was like a fake. That's not a fake, not at all. All right, this guy hanging up here in the blimp, it was Professor Fred Owens of the United Airship and Amusement Company, and he would often perform. And that's just a look down the midway. And you can see the exhibition hall, the back of the grandstand, and some of those tents and outbuildings. And look at the crowd. Unbelievable. Here's another look at postcards. It says, "Dear friend, meet me at the Great Clinton Fair, September 16, 17, and 18. Great racing each day. The exhibits are fine. Your Chumflin." And I guess you could send these out to your buddies. You probably saw out there the bulletin or the premium list. We have one from almost every single year the fair ran. The thing that you have to make sure you remember, though, is the bulletin was like almost like a sort of a football program. Thick, some great ads, but also it was a preview of what was coming. So you could read some great stuff about all these daredevil acts coming, or lion tamers, or trapeze artists, but you have to go to the item or the current to read sort of what actually happened. And not that there was that much of a difference, but some of these acts, if you had gale winds, you certainly weren't going to go down a chute on a bicycle and try to jump over 40 feet to the next ramp or something. So it didn't always happen like the bulletin said it was going to happen. That thing in the back I will explain a little bit, but horse racing was one of the major events. And they actually even, I don't think this is it at all, but they actually even had a local doctors race. That was like a little gimmick that they did. They didn't have just horses, it was a horse and carriage, because that's how the doctors made their rounds. So there were probably 6 or 8 doctors in town, and they would line up on the track and race. And from what the papers say, Dr. Bowers was always apparently the winner. All right, we're going to talk about some famous acts that came here that were truly world-renowned. These people had traveled all over the world doing this. It's funny because it looks just like a Clinton setting. This is in a different language over here on the right. But this is Oscar Noren and his wife. And they were high divers. Both of them were champion high divers. And what they did was, there was usually a pole, a tower. It says here 120 feet. I've read where some of them were 90 feet. But he would especially dive off the tower, do somersaults, dives, and everything else into 42 inches of water. So basically 3.5 feet of water he would go into it, and he lived to tell about it. But his final act, his big finale, was, here's a description of what it was. The grand climax of the day was the fire dive. For this act, Oscar Noren dons a pair of overalls and jumper over his tights, and then there is bound around him a suit of paper with long streamers of tissue. These shreds of tissue are saturated with kerosene. You know what's coming next. Kerosene is then poured upon the surface of the water in the tank, and this oil is lit on fire at the same moment that Oscar's suit is lit on fire. So he dives into this flaming pool, coming down like, I love this, a surging meteor, and with a hiss that could be heard many hundred feet away, plunges into the pool. That's what he did, probably 3 times a day, because that was what they did. They didn't just come and leave. He was contracted to do this probably 3 times a day. And there's his lovely wife. The only thing about her, it's very interesting, is she must have had quite the publicist or something, because her biographers made it sound like she was from Sweden, and when she married Oscar, she was like 13 years old or something. And I think later on they found out she was born in California. Here's another one, the famous Sedora. Sounds fancy, huh? She's called the most daring girl on earth. And you can see what's coming up next. This is just an ad, but there she is on her Indian motorcycle, and there's where she drives in that big, huge globe. And here's a better look at her. autographed picture of her, plus her, and I think it was a World's Fair. And there it is. That's I believe, a Clinton picture. And there was a trap door in this globe that was 16 feet in diameter. And she had this little motorcycle, kind of like a mini motorcycle. And she did this act, London, Paris, Berlin, Germany, all over the world. And again, this is what she did. And her finale was going so fast that she would be straight up and down, as the hawkers would say, you know, defying gravity. She was really totally upside down, but she's going so fast around that thing. I don't know how the hell she didn't end up really dizzy, but that's beside the point. And then, believe it or not, her motorcycle is still around, and I found this online. Often at real fancy classic auto shows across the nation, somebody today owns that Indian motorcycle that Sedora used in her entertainment. Anyway. Okay, here we go with the famous diving horses. And it's funny because I did hear a lot of people, you were one, but I heard from many people that were really, I think they thought these horses were being totally mistreated or whatever. They would dive into water, and again, same with them. They entertained all over the world. The horses' names were King and Queen, and they even gave a private showing to the Prince of Wales. Later on, it was King Edward VII in England. But again, all the major cities of Europe and the United States, and they really were. This one on the left is a Clinton picture. That's one of the horses just diving in. The other one to the right is diving into the ocean. I believe it was New Jersey or New York, somewhere there. And the thing is that they really dove. It's not like they jumped, but I'll read you this part. It says, to the average person, it seems impossible that an animal of that size could dive successfully from such a height. With apparent nonchalance, one of the horses saunters up to the platform, standing almost 40 feet above the heads of the audience. The animal calmly surveys the crowd below, and without the slightest hesitation, makes the dive. The most wonderful part of the act is the fact that the animal does not jump into the water, but actually dives, striking the water with his forefeet. You can see diving in like someone would really dive in the Olympics or something. During the few seconds that elapse between the dive and the landing, the spectators stand breathless with astonishment and repressed excitement. And as the animal strikes the water, almost everybody's eyes close and a shudder passes through the crowd. Then as the horse calmly rises to the surface, shakes its head, swims around, and then a spontaneous burst of applause breaks forth and everybody joins in. The horse seems to take to the feet without a bit of fear and without any urging. And I don't know about in Clinton, but in a show shortly before their Clinton show, they had people from the animal treatment group, whatever it was at the time, that investigated, because they were very concerned that these things were being mistreated or whipped. This thing would go up onto that platform all by itself, and at a certain time, just dive. And no whipping, no prodding, no nothing. They were trained to do that. The owner had a story that said, basically there was some kind of, in the field where there were just little ponies, they would find a way to jump off this kind of high plateau into water and then come over to a field that they didn't belong in. And every morning the owner would go out and see his horses over in this field when they weren't supposed to be there. They were supposed to be over there. And he got to thinking and therefore put it together and made it into quite a money maker. All right, this guy is probably the greatest daredevil that ever came to Clinton. And he came several years in a row. I believe that the name is Schrader, is how it's pronounced. He was the greatest cycle attraction ever witnessed. And he performed from 1895 to 1919. And he ended each performance, this is a wonderful lesson to everyone, he ended each performance by calling his mother and telling her that he was safe, and he managed to do it. How about that? Okay? Until the last one, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So this is what it looked like. This is a Clinton picture. The top of that on the far right is 102 feet high, and it was built for him by Clinton people, and he had to inspect it, of course. And the jump-off spot was to the far left. That was 35 feet above the ground. And I believe that's him inspecting, which he always did, of course, before his jump. Or either that, or he's saying something like, why the hell am I doing this? Whatever. But that's what he's doing right there. And this is a much better look. And I didn't explain really what he does. He goes down the chute on a bicycle, all right? And the bicycle goes one way, and he dives into a pool. You can see it right there in front of the grandstand, okay? And the bike always lands somewhere else, thank God for him. But the real problem was, it was always the case, from the top, the 102 feet, he can't see where the water is. All right, but he has it all measured out and figures out what he's going to do. But when he starts, he can't see the water. And he goes flying down, and then right at the jump-off spot, they say it's not like it just goes. He actually leaps off his bicycle at a certain point. And then he's almost like Superman. He goes straight, diving into this pool, while the bike goes somewhere else. The water is 4 feet deep. The pool is 12 feet wide, and it's usually about 100 feet away from the end of the jump. And I do know the item had a little article about the first time he was here, his first jump. All of a sudden he was almost ready to go, and they noticed that the water was leaking out of the pool. So they had to call the Clinton Fire Department to get up there and get some water in the pool, and they managed.
Question.
Yes?
Is that the same pool that the horses dove into?
I don't know. And I don't think he was worried one way or the other about it. So this one on the left is from, I think, New Jersey, a picture. And you kind of get to see, not very much, but that's the bicycle, and there he is doing his Superman impression. This is a Clinton picture. And when you take a real good look at it, we have it on display in the other room, that's him that looks like a missile. But I think that's him going straight off, and right underneath is the bicycle. And, he did this for a living for almost 25 years. Imagine that, 25 years. And he always, of course, had to, he had a standing offer of $1,000. He dared anybody, I'll give you $1,000 if you try that trick. Needless to say, nobody was that stupid. But anyway, about 15 years after his Clinton performances, he did die doing this act. It was May of 1919, and he did this trick in New York in front of 25,000 people, including his wife and infant son. And he struck the side of the tank and was fatally injured. And they said it was his 2020 dive. So he had done this 2,020 times before and never missed. And he did this time. And he actually did it free, too. He was he was quite a philanthropist, too. Many times he would do these free things. This one happened to be for Salvation Army in New York. And he did it free. He paid all expenses, and he didn't charge to do it. And he ended up dead maybe a day later. Here's another kind that's a little bit safer. This guy's name was E.H. Honers, and he was called Cyclone. And he was kind of like an Evel Knievel type, a little bit more than what we might be used to today. He came down a chute much lower than the last guy and jumped across this pit or whatever to the other side of the ramp. And this is a Clinton picture of that. So we don't see him going down. That might even be him inspecting right there. But he went down the chute and then went over, not quite like the Grand Canyon or whatever Evel did that time, but and they even had trained monkeys do some of these things. You know, they go down the chute and round and round. We had all kinds of animal acts. Of course, that was all part of it. We had monkeys doing that. Hot air balloons and blimps and things like that were really big. That was kind of a new thing to us, and in little old Clinton, it probably was very unusual to see this kind of stuff that went on. So there was always hot air balloon rides, but there was some extra stuff to it, some real daredevil acts. They would give you rides if they wanted. There was a case of a woman on a swing under the basket, and she would parachute down once the balloon got high enough. That was a popular thing too over several years, where the balloon would go up and there'd be guys who just dive out of the balloon, dive out of the basket, but they had a parachute and they would come down and try to hit a target. Sometimes they'd come down in the middle of the woods, sometimes they'd come down in South Lancaster, and people would go looking for them to help them and bring them back to the park. So let me read you about the trapeze artist trick. Miss Ethel Heath. Ethel did a parachute jump. Shortly after 5 p.m., the big balloon was sent away with Miss Heath seated on a trapeze underneath the basket. The big bag, we're talking about the balloon, not Ethel, rose about 1,500 feet in the air, drifting away towards the south because of a slight north wind. There was a hustle by the crowd for points of vantage, and soon came 3 revolver shots, which conveyed to Miss Heath that the time for her to cut loose had come. And almost instantly, she was seen to drop, her parachute opened, and she came to earth in the open lot right near Highland Street. And within 15 minutes, was back in the park, escorted by a large crowd. So this was big stuff. I mean, you can imagine, you know, I think it'd be big stuff to most of us today, probably, that you can imagine, especially the kids from 1889 to 1915 seeing this kind of stuff. Pretty odd. So air shows were always popular. Blimps, of course, coming across. Oh, this was a famous one too. Oh, yes, yes. This is, I'll try my best here. Mademoiselle Gertrude Carlotta Pianka. She was a lady lion tamer. How about that? She was from Poland, and once again, entertained all over the world, everywhere. And the lions would, here she is right here, this is a Clinton picture. The lions would, she'd make the lions jump through hoops of fire, and of course, she'd sometimes blindfold herself just to show that she had complete control over these animals. And her finale, of course, was to open the mouth of a lion and stick her head in, of course. You gotta do that, right? So it's funny, here's probably the best picture of her right here in front. And this again is a Clinton picture. And the local paper said, Mademoiselle Pianka is not only the original lion tamer, but is reputed to be the handsomest woman in her line of work in the world. Which makes me think, how the hell many women are there? But she was the handsomest of all of them, apparently. All 2 of them, or whatever. Listen to this part. She is blonde, tall, has a splendid figure, and is always richly and attractively gowned. And a lady lion tamer. How about that? Well, then, of course, there were aerial acts, high wires, trapeze acts. This is just one of many of them. from Paris. Look at these outfits. How about that, huh? This is 1900 too. Here's another one. He was on a wire 100 feet in the air, and I guess part of his thing was comedy. He would make believe he fell, or drop and hang on to the last second, or make believe he was going to fall, whatever. Again, no wonder 30,000 people or whatever came to these events. This was big doings in the little town of Clinton. Really, truly was. Of course, there were animal acts. You had to have animal acts. We had dog shows. We had talking dogs. We had seals that played musical instruments. We had dancing bears. Even one year, I think it was 1905, somebody brought 8 polar bears to entertain Clintonians. So here is another look at the grandstand on the left, and then on the right, that little, looks like a pagoda, was the judges' stands. So for any particular event that was going on, whoever was selected to be the judge of the event would be standing there, several of them probably in there so they could get a better look at what was going on. The grandstands were always full. They held 1,000 people. Imagine that. And special seats in the grandstand cost 50 cents. And again, I can't emphasize enough how horse racing was always a key part of this. You brought the fastest, best horse you could to this place, to this event, because you knew many people would be there and people would be buzzing about you all the time. There was even competitions between fire departments. They're called at the time, the fire laddies, but like Clinton against Lancaster in some kind of event or whatever. I never saw this one myself, but there was a Lillian Hoffman who performed once up there, I think in about 1910. She raced around the track standing on 2 horses. So, I think we saw that maybe on TV or in the movies, like a rodeo. This is a woman standing there, 1 foot on one horse, 1 foot on the other, dashing down the racetrack. Pretty big stuff. And there, look at how full it was at the time. And you can just imagine, and I've said it already several times, but just think of the joy it brought, especially kids from this town who I can't imagine would have seen too many of anything like this growing up. And I mean, I should talk. I'm not sure if I've seen much of this, and I'm old, but anyway. So here's the last of it, unfortunately, and I didn't put these in proper order. I should, but 1915 comes along, and I believe that was the last show. And I don't know what happened. The end was kind of sudden. But, you had an approaching World War I, maybe nothing going on in 1915, at least for us. But maybe the whole agricultural interest started to die off. And so from 1915 to 1922, you still had the driving park there. The grandstands and the buildings were all sitting there. But you'd get an occasional horse race, maybe neighbors or friends going up to use the park. I believe the Boy Scouts used the area way in the back as some kind of camp sometimes. So the place was used, but nothing like these big, huge shows and daredevil acts or anything like that. So in 1922, the driving park went up for public auction. And everybody knew that there was only one guy who could probably afford to buy it. And that was still John Elliott Thayer, who had started the whole thing anyway. And he bought it for $1,500. And when he did, that dissolved the association that he was president of. So in reality, the association owned the driving park, but didn't pay the bills at the end, and suddenly Clinton Savings Bank foreclosed on them, and they went to public auction. And that's when John E. Thayer bought it, 1922. So Jacob Schamberg bought all the buildings on the site, everything. bought them all. And so some of the buildings he sold off right away. It is my understanding that, by 1929, John E. Thayer, that's when he sold the driving park to St. John's Cemetery. And you have to admit that somebody at St. John's, a priest at the time at St. John's, was thinking, saying, someday we're going to have to expand this cemetery, and here's our chance to grab the land. So they did in 1929. The grandstands were kind of the biggest issue, and there was serious talk that they were going to be moved to Fuller Field, and those were going to be new bleachers for football, baseball, and everything. And of course, you saw the pictures. They were true grandstands, solid lumber, and a roof over your head and the whole thing. And they would have been grand. But for whatever the reason, the town didn't have a Parks and Rec board then, but it had some kind of recreation committee. And they decided, let's not do this. Let's forget that idea. So my understanding is that the lumber was sold off. And I know Elaine's not with us tonight, but she said she had relatives who built a cottage over at Bear Hill Pond, and she knew that she heard whatever, that the lumber that built the cottage, used to build the cottage, was from the grandstands. I guess it was really, high quality lumber, and so there's probably houses around town that were built with that wood. There must have been tons of it, obviously. So the ending was sudden, it really was. And again, St. John's Church obviously now uses it and then began to use it. I don't know how many bodies are buried at St. John's Cemetery, but that area was like the center of activity. And in closing, even if you looked at the Clinton history book from 1900, Clinton had a big celebration when we were 50 years old. And there was fireworks and athletic events and all these great things that the town turned out for. All of it was held up at the Clinton, the driving park where St. John's Cemetery is today. There was a baseball game up there, the married men against the single men. And stuff like that. Not only horse racing, but also racing, almost like a track meet. Anybody could sign up. You could run the 2 mile, you could run the 50-yard dash, ribbons given out, and all those kinds of things. So it's an area and that's where they fired off the fireworks too, which was kind of close to the hospital. There was some complaining, just like there is today on Facebook about fireworks, when you think of it. But anyway, it was a real center of town, believe it or not. Way up there on the Lancaster line was a real hotbed of activities back in the day. So, that is it. Do you have any questions for me?
I got a question.
Sure. You want to get the lights, Bob? Thanks.
Is there any particular reason why it just ended?
I don't know that. I think there just seemed to be a movement away from agricultural interests. With a war coming up was probably another thing. Obviously, the association that ran it wasn't paying their bills for whatever the reason. And the head honcho had to bail him out, and he had the money, so thank God he did. And again, I think a lot of people question about the business with the cemetery right there, but I don't really think the cemetery was probably anywhere near where the fair was. That's how much room was up there. And at the end, I think the park was 3 acres. And even today, there's tons of room up there. As I said, when I went up there the other day, I didn't know they put a road through. So as soon as you go up Greeley Hill, the very first left, all that open space, they are now planning it for, it's going to be a cemetery anyway, but there's a road now through, and that's what it's going to be used for. And that's what somebody thought of in 1922.
So, the town line is pretty close. Is it Magnolia or Silver Street or whichever one?
Yeah, somewhere there. That's why, especially in the early days, they called it the Clinton-Lancaster Driving Park.
So how much of it was actually on Clinton Lane?
I don't know. It probably was like 50-50 or roughly, and that's why the double name.
Yeah.
In Clinton we take it over, so pretty soon it It was the Clinton driving park.
I can't believe the attendance, it's staggering.
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Where'd they park?
They came on the train, yeah, parking, it was always parking. No, they came on the train mostly, and there was like a taxi service, I think it was for a dime. You could, you know, somebody was there, just like a modern taxi today, Uber, whatever, and you jump into the horse and buggy, and for 10 cents they would bring you up to the fair. Yes?
I forget, but when was the last year of the fair and when was the flu epidemic?
Oh, that's, yeah, 1915, and when was the flu epidemic? 17, 18?
No, 1919.
1919,
So it
yes.
wasn't associated with that?
Yep. The only epidemic that ever hit up there was one year they had to cancel the cattle show because there was an outbreak of hoof and mouth disease, which some people would say still exists today in Clinton. Yes.
There's over 12,000 graves at St. John.
Is there really 12,000?
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem like much when you consider 4,000 came at the same time.
Right.
4,000 came from the island behind Clinton High School. So they came at once.
There might be multiple people in each grave.
Well, yes, that's for sure, yes, yeah. Because I know when they moved them, they didn't even know how many were in there. They just kind of threw them all into one, and that was in the paper that way. Thank you for coming.